Well, first of all, welcome to Sheep Street. Sheep Street, looking around, it's only about 300 yards, something like that. But it's probably, well, certainly up to 10 years ago, it was the most haunted street in the country. But what I think I can do is take you on a little trip down this street, point out some of the buildings that are still haunted, tell you some of the stories. Some are very spooky, some are very frightening, some are very funny as well. Are you ready to go? Let's go. This little building here, when I came here 20 years ago, it was a newsagent. Very nice gentleman in there, had a dog, various things, and he used to tell me that it was haunted. Particularly early on in the morning, he'd come here. Imagine this, he arrives here at 5 o'clock in the morning, waiting for all the papers to arrive, everything like that, and when they arrive at about 5:45, something like that, there's absolutely no one in the street, nothing going on, everything's in darkness. He's in here doing his papers, and someone starts talking. And because he's busy with his things, he said, "Oh, I'll be with you in a minute." He's thinking like someone's come through the door, and then he realises, of course, everything's locked up here. When he turns around, there's absolutely nobody there at all. Now, he was here for 2 or 3 years. When he left, a lady came over, and she took it over. And she had exactly the same thing happening to her as well. The thing is, you see, underneath here, right the way along, these were all the cells going back 300 years ago. And the town hall was actually used where they brought the felons and everything, found them guilty, and pushed them down into terrible places right the way under here. So it's no wonder that on this side of the street, nearly every place is haunted along here. Now, this next story is one that will probably frighten you a little bit, actually. It'll frighten anybody that's watching this. One time it was actually a teddy bear shop here. A lovely couple took it over and they turned the whole place. There were just hundreds of teddy bears and dolls and all that kind of thing everywhere, and they thought it was lovely until one day the Teds started moving around. It was quite frightening because things were being thrown at them, particularly at the husband, so he might be stood by the door and a teddy hit him on the back of the head. But then she gave me a ring and she was absolutely frightened to death. I went dashing around to see what was going on. And 2 things had happened. I think it was on the same day as well, and that was it. It was enough for them to pack up and leave after this. The first thing was they'd set a load of dolls up, all on the shelves and everything. They'd come out, they were going on to the other side of the building, and suddenly they heard this crash. And when they went back in, all the dolls were on the floor, and one group of the dolls were all sat together in a circle. Now, how that could have happened, I have to believe it, because there's no reason for them to get out of me and do this. She was white as a sheet, but the second one was enough, and it frightened me as well, because she said that she walked in on her own and she could hear a noise of something crawling, and she says crawling across the floor was a dress. Nothing in it, just a baby's dress, just crawling across the floor. And she ran out and she never went back into the building, and her husband closed it up and they sold it on. This is not so much a haunting. There is things that used to happen. Now they say nothing happens here. The toilets were haunted and things would get thrown about up there, or constantly doors would be opening and closing. So they never used the toilets. If they needed to use the toilet, they'd go to a public one rather than actually use their own. This one was a pub, but it was taken over by a very interesting gentleman. He eventually became a magistrate, and he became, somebody really well-to-do about town. But at the time, he was an out-and-out robber. He was a thief. He had a gang, and he was a cattle rustler and sheep rustler. And what he needed was somewhere safe that his gang could get together and plot what he was going to do. Right in the centre of Skipton. And so he bought this pub, and he thought, well, we'll run the pub, and upstairs my gang and I can be plotting. And he thought what he'd do was he would fill the pub with the most unsavoury characters that you could imagine, really nasty people, so that it would keep everybody away whilst they were plotting. And it worked really well, because after a while he was selling beer. He couldn't believe he was making a fortune selling beer to all these thieves and things that were in there, heavies and whatnot. And of course the ladies of the night, the prostitutes came up from the canal. They were all coming in here and looking after all the men. So he was letting all the rooms off, and he was making more and more, until in the end he decided he'd give up actually being a thief and being a cattle rustler, because he was making a fortune running this place. It was a brothel, it was everything. Now, the most amazing thing of all was that once he'd got all the prostitutes and things from around here coming in here and servicing the men, he also then started advertising. And he was advertising in the paper, and he actually put, you won't believe this, he actually put an advert in the paper, and it says, come to my bar, he says, come and drink the best beer with the best people and everything. He says, we've got best ladies. And he said, these are not prostitutes from the canal at Skipton. These are high-class prostitutes from Keighley. Yes, Keighley. The clergy got together with the bailiffs and they decided they were going to get rid of all this. They just couldn't allow it to happen any longer. One night they came down with a big cart, and there was about 24 of them with sticks and what have you, and they just smashed their way into the building, smashed it up, threw them all out. The fella, as I say, he survived. The high-class prostitutes were sent back to Keighley and what have you, and it all returned just to being a normal pub called the Mason's Arms, I think it was called. And yet this gentleman, went on to be a magistrate, and then he went on to be a big man around the town, a very well-respected man, and he was as rich as Christus because he'd made a fortune. Whether it was out of the prostitutes from Keighley or not, I've no idea, but good luck to him on that one. This is a little story about a little girl, about 5 years old, something like that, and it goes back before I came to Skipton. I came here in 2001. And this first began around 1997. It was the first time she was seen, and they were giving this building a complete makeover. Two young guys were doing in charge of it, and they decided rather than stay in a hotel, they'd use the money to go on the booze, and they'd bring sleeping bags and spend the night here. And that's what they did. And they went upstairs onto the first floor, which I've been into, and it's quite spooky up there. And they both woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a little girl looking at them. They said it frightened them to death, although she herself was not frightening. But the fact that she was sparkling, they said she was just like a sparkling sort of a vision. And she was just looking at them as if to say, what are you doing in my house, kind of thing. And she probably never seen anybody up there in the middle of the night. Well, the little girl started manifesting herself through Val, who was the manageress. And the manageress used to come down in the morning and open up this door here, and she'd find something on the floor. And she'd think, oh, what's that? It's fallen off. Pick it up, put it back. But every day there was something being left there, and after a while she realised that this little girl was leaving these little presents for her, maybe even trying to contact her. She didn't know what to do. She started leaving things. They disappeared. That seemed to be working, but they couldn't make contact with this little girl, but they could hear her. They said every so often they'd hear her giggle up the steps, at the top of the steps, but the girl never showed herself. Now, at the very back at that time, they had a board like, one of these A boards there, which they used to put out here. So they started writing messages on, who are you? Can you write a message? But the girl never replied, but whatever they wrote on, if it was paper and stuck it on there, that disappeared as well. So the little girl was getting the messages, but they didn't know at all whether she was actually responding. But then it started to get very, very strange, because this girl worked out a way to set the alarms off, in the burglar alarms, in the middle of the night. And it was happening regularly, and of course Val had to come down and the police would arrive. They'd open up and go in, and they'd hear this giggling upstairs. And it was a little girl, and obviously she was enjoying getting this attention. So the last one what I want to show you in Sheep Street then is the almighty Woolly Sheep Inn, probably the number one pub in Skipton. We all like to think so anyway. It looks tiny, but actually it goes back a long way. You can get lost in the corridors there. Now, we did a big night here. We had a séance here about a year ago, and all kinds of things started to happen within it. People were saying they could see a little girl there in the corner, which had been seen quite often. Apparently her and her mother had died in a fire here. I went and looked that up, and I found the year of the fire, and I found the fact that yes, a mother and a child had died, and it would seem the mother had moved on and the child had been left behind, and so she still haunts it. And she said something really strange, which frightened a lot of us. She said, there's a witch in the room, and she's persecuting me. And there was this woman with us, and she was really weird, really strange. She said, oh, that's me. And she was talking about she could see this girl, and she wanted to get rid of this girl. And the girl's messages was coming through and saying, take her away from me, take her away, she's frightening me. And we didn't know what was going on with that. I was ready to go home, I have to say, But the most frightening one took place in room number 3. Now, it's not happened for over 20 years or more, but when I first came to Skipton and started doing these ghost walks, it was the very first story that I heard about, was the demon, the terrible thing that was in room number 3. They actually used to advertise it on the internet, that if you could spend a night in room number 3, you'd get your money back, and you get a free breakfast as well. And plenty of people tried it, but no one ever managed to spend a night in room number 3. I spent an afternoon in it. I should have said I spent about 40 minutes in it, and that was enough for me. I had to get out after 40 minutes. Room number 3 was a very small room. It was a single room. It had a dingy old window that looked out onto the dustbins at the back there. And the most amazing thing was no birds landed on the window frame. There'd never been any. It was clean as a whistle, but all the others are all pigeons all around here, everywhere. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, as I sat there, after a while you just started to get this terrible feeling that something wanted you out of the room, and that if you didn't get out it was going to turn very nasty. And I started to feel as if either I was growing or the room was getting smaller, but either way it was pushing me towards the door. And after about half an hour of that, I felt so sick that I got out of it. Now, what was supposed to happen if I'd have stayed, or if I'd spent the night in that room, was that at some time in the night you'd get that feeling. People would stick on the bed like this, sat there trying to fight it, and then what would happen is if they wouldn't move, the bed would start to shake, would start to move, and all the blankets would go up into the air and they would just hang over the people. Now, I haven't seen that, so I have to say that's what I was told, but that's why people used to come from miles around to try and spend the night in room number 3, and apparently that's what happened. But that's not like a ghost, that's like a demonic presence, that's something else. And when it's that, I'm not interested. I don't want to know about demons and things, anything of the dark side. I love ghosts, and I love talking to them, and I love them walking with me, and that's fine. But they still see people on the corridors, and down in the cellars there's a lady also from the 1700s with a big wonderful one of those massive pompadour hairstyles and all the gear on. Looks like she's going to some fancy dress thing. She's not, she was dressed at the time. She was the lady that lived there, the lady of the house before. It was a pub as well. So there you are, that's Sheep Street for you in a half a nutshell or whatever. You can always come and have a look yourself and spend some time down here. There's plenty of other places that are haunted in Skipton as well. But for Sheep Street, we're going to close it down because it's getting cold and dark.